Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on increasing impact by sharing an ArchivesSpace implementation. This webinar is intended to highlight the challenges and benefits of sharing an ArchivesSpace implementation across multiple organizations. I'm Jessica Crouch, the Community Engagement Lead for ArchivesSpace, and I'm joined today by Christine DeBella, Celia Caust-Ellenbogen, Laurin Penland, Eric Fritzler, and Portia Vescio. In this webinar, ArchivesSpace Program Manager Christine DeBella will provide an overview of some use cases and considerations for multiple institutions sharing one ArchivesSpace implementation. She will also discuss ways individual and collaborating organizations can participate in the ArchivesSpace community and even increase their impact. After, members of the ArchivesSpace community will present on the specific decisions, needs, challenges, and benefits they have encountered facilitating a shared ArchivesSpace implementation for multiple organizations. First, Celia Caust-Ellenbogen and Laurin Penland of the TriCollege Consortium, which includes Bryn Mawr, Haverford, and Swarthmore Colleges, will present on integrating the consortium's instances of ArchivesSpace and Alma. Preparing for this project required reconciling controlled lists and authorities across institutions, as well as collaborative decision-making around the implementation of several plugins. Celia is an archivist who started working at Swarthmore in 2015 and spearheaded the TriCollege Consortium's implementation of ArchivesSpace in 2016. Laurin started working at the TriCollege Consortium as the junior digital library developer in 2021. Their main responsibilities include maintaining shared applications like ArchivesSpace and collaborating with stakeholders across the TriCo to make changes to their shared ILS and catalog. Then, Eric Fritzler from the Center for Jewish History will discuss the center's shared services model, which includes administering a suite of library systems and a reading room on behalf of partner institutions. Since the dual systems migration mostly completed in 2020, they've used ArchivesSpace to centralize and normalize controlled lists of agents, subjects, and other dropdowns among 5 partner institutions working concurrently in the same instance. While always working to improve integration between library systems, they have reached a flexible and mostly stable equilibrium between ArchivesSpace, their discovery layer Primo, their digital asset preservation system Rosetta, and their digital asset preservation system Rosetta to leverage further functionality in ArchivesSpace. Eric is the Director of Metadata and Discovery Services at the Center for Jewish History. He and his team of colleagues help oversee the library systems at the center, including ArchivesSpace, on behalf of 5 partner institutions housed at the center. With over 15 years working in the metadata trenches, Eric earned his Master's of Library and Information Science at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan, alongside a Certificate of Archival Administration. And finally, Portia Vescio of University of New Mexico will present on migrating 16 institutions from across the state of New Mexico to ArchivesSpace from a legacy system that's been in place for almost 20 years. She will discuss the challenges faced in communication and data cleanup, as well as managing individuals struggling to learn new workflows and becoming an accidental project manager. Portia began working at the University of New Mexico in 2016 as the university archivist and is responsible for collecting, cataloging, and promoting the university's historical documents and photographs. Prior to arriving at UNM, Portia was the Assistant Director of the University Archives and Historical Collections at Michigan State University and was Manuscripts Librarian for the Rio Grande Historical Collections at New Mexico State University. Portia expressed interest in helping UNM find a collection management system when they started looking for one in 2019, and after ArchivesSpace was chosen, found herself suddenly assigned to being the main point of contact for archival repositories around the state. I very much look forward to hearing from all of our presenters today, so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Christine.
Thanks, Jessica. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. I've got a few slides here to lay out some typical use cases for sharing an ArchivesSpace and also talk about how that sharing can be done in ways that benefit the ArchivesSpace community as a whole. That's going to lay the table here, and then I'm really very interested to hear about the actual sharing our other presenters are doing with their colleagues and what that has made possible. So what do you think about when you think about ArchivesSpace? You probably think of the application, and the one that, if you're using it, is probably pretty central to how you're doing the work of your institution in areas like accessioning, arrangement, description, collection management, and access. And even if you're not using it yet, you might be thinking of it as an aspiration or a goal that you're working towards. But ArchivesSpace is not just an application. It's the community that comes together to create that application according to the values we have as archives and information professionals. Values like being standards-driven, extensible, and customizable and localizable to meet the needs of many different situations. And even more than this, ArchivesSpace is an opportunity for all of these people to not just build an application, but to work together to solve common problems and address challenges. It's a place where people from many different backgrounds and institutions who might not otherwise come together can and do. So sharing ArchivesSpace across institutions is really a great demonstration of people seizing that opportunity. And we want as many people as possible to be able to benefit from all the good things that happen when people are able to manage their archival materials more effectively, and when users get access to primary sources for all the reasons that that's valuable and important to the world. So I did want to note a few realities about what makes the opportunity that ArchivesSpace represents possible. Because we all know that keeping a good thing going, no matter how many people want it to succeed and how many people depend on it, is hard. So ArchivesSpace is sustained by members and affiliated organizations. It's free to download, it's free to share, as we'll be talking about today, and it's free to provide services for, but it has membership and community-led governance for sustainability. As you would expect, building and maintaining the ArchivesSpace application and all the good things we do for the community are not free. And what's accomplished through membership and organizational affiliations benefits everyone who uses ArchivesSpace. So whether you choose ArchivesSpace membership for yourself, you benefit from people who use ArchivesSpace choosing membership. All right, let's talk about some of the ways to share and get back to sharing specifically. So first, a quick reminder of what you can share, because I've actually had people tell me that they didn't realize that they were allowed to share ArchivesSpaces. And that's really what sort of inspired this webinar. So you can share the application. You can share the ArchivesSpace application anywhere, any way you like. ArchivesSpace is open source software and anyone can download and use it. You're really like, I'm going to list some ideas, but the possibilities are really only limited by your imagination and your capacity to implement what you envision. What you can't share are ArchivesSpace membership benefits. Because as a member, you're not paying for your access to the ArchivesSpace application, you're paying for the many benefits that we offer to help you get the most out of using the application. So things like access to the user manual and member-only events and listservs, discounts on training, technical support, and eligibility to get involved in our governance groups. Membership benefits are for the staff of one institution only. Okay, here's some specific ways you can share. And I'm going to give you a few, but there are definitely a lot more out there. And our group here is going to be talking about what they've encountered in their specific experiences, which may or may not be these use cases that I'm going to talk about. And that's really, an example of why it's so great to have a whole community to draw on for inspiration and guidance. Okay, so here's one. One institution has an ArchivesSpace deployment that it manages itself or through a hosting provider, and then it takes in individual finding aids from other organizations and makes those accessible for them. So this would be good when contributing organizations want to make their finding aids more accessible, but they don't really have a need or the capacity to do updates themselves or use the other functions that the ArchivesSpace application offers. So that would be one example. Another example would be a host institution uses the repository functionality of ArchivesSpace, not just to create repositories for different units within its own organization, but create separate repositories for other organizations within its ArchivesSpace so that staff at the participating institutions can create and manage their own records. And this would be good for a situation where participating organizations need to manage their own data directly, and all the organizations, including the host, are okay with seeing each other's shared record types, like agents and subject records. So that's a level of sharing where it extends to really sharing all the data and sharing all the functionality. Now, for a situation where the organizations aren't okay with sharing that, like sort of that level of sharing of data, you'd have another example where one institution provides IT services such as hosting so that each participating institution can have their own ArchivesSpace deployment. And like I said, that's for a situation where people want to share and they want to collaborate with each other, but they don't necessarily want to share all their data together. Another example, and this is the last one that I'm going to talk about, would be a situation where there's a consortial model where a central IT service unit manages ArchivesSpace for all of the participating members, either in a single deployment or with individual deployments for each of the participants. So this would be good when the partner organizations already are collaborating with each other through an official or unofficial member-based organization. And if you're thinking about doing this, or you are already doing this, I'd also encourage you to consider our consortium provider affiliation program in addition to individual institutional membership. If you haven't heard of our consortium provider program, this is a new program that we introduced last year, and it's specifically for consortia that are legally or unofficially recognized membership organizations that bring together other organizations to collaborate around maybe a whole bunch of different things in archives, library, or information work. In our case, they would be providing services related to ArchivesSpace to their own members, and often that would probably be at a low cost or on a cost recovery basis. And the organizations and the consortium want to support and have a greater say in the future of ArchivesSpace while getting access to resources that will help them provide those services. So here are some of the benefits of the consortium provider program. There are things like access to the help center, being able to participate in member-only events, being able to get like a little bit of extra assistance and participate in our governance activities in the Technical Advisory Council. It is important to note that this is not a discount membership program. It's not like a bundle of memberships for a whole bunch of institutions. It's a program that offers benefits specifically to staff employed by the consortium, not their member organizations. It's like our registered service provider program in some ways. Registered service provider program is for nonprofit and for-profit organizations that contract with organizations for hosting, but also want to contribute to the ArchivesSpace community and participate in the community and contribute to ArchivesSpace's sustainability. And just like our registered service provider program, consortium providers benefit from providing services to institutions that are ArchivesSpace members. Their fee can be discounted according to how many members they provide services to. So as I said at the beginning of the talk, one of the things that I wanted to mention is ways that people can use ArchivesSpace and share ArchivesSpace in the case of this presentation that benefit the ArchivesSpace community as a whole and contribute to the sustainability of ArchivesSpace. So if you're already a member, if you're already an affiliated organization, thank you. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for contributing to ArchivesSpace's financial sustainability. And thank you for other ways that you are surely contributing to ArchivesSpace as well. If you aren't yet doing that, I would really encourage you to consider becoming an affiliated organization, consider becoming a member, especially if you're sharing ArchivesSpace. because sharing archive space represents a substantial savings of time and energy and money compared to going it alone. If membership isn't quite right for you right now, there are some other things you can consider too. If you're a consortium or you use ArchivesSpace through a consortium, encourage that consortium to become a consortium provider. If you use a hosting provider, encourage them to become a registered service provider if they aren't already. And some of our providers even offer a discount for ArchivesSpace members. So encourage them to offer a discount for ArchivesSpace members if they don't already. And if you can't do any of these things right now, definitely consider ways you can contribute a different way by sharing your expertise through our programming or our documentation or our code. Above all, be an ArchivesSpace advocate in your institution and in your community. And this last slide here, I'm just providing some links to some of the things I talked about in this presentation. You can always, of course, reach out to us at archivesspacehome@lyrasis.org. And now I'm going to turn it over to the other presenters. And I'm really, really interested to hear about how they're sharing ArchivesSpace.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Christine. My name is Celia. I use she, her pronouns, and I work at Swarthmore College. I'm joined today by my colleague.
Hi, I'm Laurin Penland. I use she, they pronouns, and I am the junior digital library developer for the TriCollege Consortium.
And today we're excited to talk to you about our shared instance of ArchivesSpace. And we're going to kind of put an emphasis on a project to integrate ArchivesSpace and Alma. So I'm going to give a little bit of background about TriCo and motivations for collaborating on this. Then we're going to walk through the phases of the migration with an emphasis on sharing with you policies, workflows, and tools that perhaps you could use if you're considering something similar, and that enabled us to do this work consortially. And lastly, Lauren's going to talk about the challenges and benefits of working together on this kind of project. Okay, so let's dive in. So the TriCollege Consortium is not a formal legal entity, but it is a collaboration between these three colleges in southeastern Pennsylvania, suburbs of Philadelphia. We do have a TriCo budget. We have a lot of consortial systems and a couple of shared staff, including Laurin. Many of our library committees are joint with staff from all three of the schools. We've had an integrated ILS since 1988, and most of our major library systems, including our DAMs and ArchivesSpace, are shared. And our status, just looking at what Christine walked us through, is that each of the three schools has its own ArchivesSpace membership at the small level. But together, we all work out of the same shared instance that is hosted by those TriCo staff. So we implemented ArchivesSpace in 2016, migrating from EAD files and MARC records, as well as Archivist Toolkit. And because three separate campuses were all adding to the same database, as you can imagine, there was a lot of duplication, a lot of inconsistency, and a lot of messiness in those shared records. Primarily here, we're talking about the names and the subjects files. So right from the time that we migrated, we realized this was a problem that we were going to have to focus on. And so we had some early rounds of cleanup that were focused on tasks like this, parsing data into appropriate fields and deduplicating. So we had a few goals in these early cleanup efforts in the shared agents and subjects records. The biggest one was data integrity within ArchivesSpace, and like I said, deduplicating. We didn't have a public user interface open yet, but we were looking ahead to that and thinking about better searchability for users. But also, right from the beginning, we were thinking about representation in our ILS, MARC, and the ability to do MARC exports. So we were moving gradually from a completely manual process of bib record creation to semi-automated. And we were thinking ahead, hopeful for an eventual full integration with our ILS. So these were the 3 phases. I'm going to talk about the first 2 and then hand over Laurin to talk about the most recent one. And you'll see throughout, we approached this work consortially, which allowed us at different times to utilize expertise and available staff time, available student time, all of which waxed and waned across the repositories over time. And in these slides, you're going to see a lot of links. These slides will be posted afterwards, so you can hopefully follow them and reuse some of these tools yourself. So this was the initial migration team. I'm not going to run through all the names on all of these slides, but I do just want to give an acknowledgement to Emily Tai-Sing-Wong, who passed away about 1.5 years ago, but was just one of the most talented metadata librarians I've ever met and was really integral to this process at all stages. So the first tool that we created was a policy, and this was an agreement across all 3 schools about how staff were going to enter data into those shared records, agents and subjects and extents moving forward. So we created the policy, and you can take a look at it if you'd like. Next, Emily created a workflow. It was extremely detailed, lots of screenshots, and with a target audience of students. So the idea here was to enable students to do some of the necessary tasks to deduplicate, correct types, and parse up agents and subjects that were messy in ArchivesSpace. That was the early phase, and then things kind of stayed like that for a couple of years until 2020. At that point, it was lockdown. A lot of us were working from home with extra time to spend on work from home tasks. We had just installed the University of Denver Library's Alma ArchivesSpace plugin, and that allowed us to directly push records to Alma, but one at a time. And that brought a renewed concern to the controlled vocabulary terms we might be contaminating the ILS with. And a really critical tool for this phase was an ODBC connection. And so this is a tool that let us view the ArchivesSpace database in Microsoft Access and generate reports, custom reports across the fields that we needed. And so this allowed me to generate reports that could be sent along to the team to review and for student workers and the team to make edits and finalize. Another really important tool at this point was the LCSH reconciliation service. And so this was an automated process of looking up all of our names and subjects in ArchivesSpace, verifying if they were in LC, and if so, adding URLs to them. And Natalie Schilstedt, who was a colleague at Bryn Mawr at the time, was the one who did this process. To be honest, I don't know exactly how she did this. You can find some instructions online. I don't know if they're still valid, but I do know that if you want to find Natalie, she works at the Presbyterian Historical Society now if you want to try and reach out to her.
So yeah, hi everyone. I'm really excited to be here to talk about one of my favorite projects. So I came to the TriCo in the fall of 2021, and when I arrived, there was already this goal to get all of the finding aids that were in ArchivesSpace into our integrated library system, Alma. And with the idea of improving discovery for our users, especially undergrads, who mainly find library resources by using the catalog. So I was coming to this position at the TriCo with a background in special collections, and I had some experience working in ArchivesSpace, and I knew firsthand how cumbersome it could be to be essentially doing double data entry by creating a finding aid in ASpace and then creating a bib record in ILS, and also making sure that there was a record in OCLC. So I was really excited about the idea of helping folks at TriCo streamline this process, and about improving discovery of special collections for our users. Now, I don't remember who first told me about the NYU Mark XML export plugin. It was probably Sarah Horowitz or Celia, but essentially what's exciting about the plugin is that it exports the top container information into the MARC XML. So you can then use that information to create items and holdings records and attach them to the bib record. So, so we had this goal of getting the bib records into Alma, and we know a little bit about the NYU plugin. And so we thought, let's give this a try. And so the first step was to assemble a group of stakeholders across the TriCo. And I've listed them here. Instead of including their job titles, I included their defined roles that were created in our project charter, which I'll mention later. And yeah, all of the folks on this list were very, very important to making this project a success. And we also worked with folks across the TriCo that were not on this list and when needed. Next slide, please. So one of the first things we needed to do as a group was to define the functional requirements of the project. So we made a list of all the things that we thought could possibly go into the project. And then we spent a lot of time paring it down and reaching consensus. This is just kind of like a snippet of the spreadsheet. And if you want to see our full list, you can follow the link in the slide. Next slide, please. And then we created our project charter. This was a really important document that outlined the scope, timeline, and resources for the project. And next slide, please. And after we had the functional requirements and the project charter, we were ready to dig into the bib record specifications. We essentially needed to decide what we wanted our bib records to look like and what changes we might want to make to the MARC export. So I created this spreadsheet that essentially compares the default ASpace MARC export to the NYU plugin export, and also to the OAI export, because we at one point considered using OAI. And it also includes some extra MARC fields that we wanted to add. So this allowed us to make comparisons and to be thoughtful about what would work the best for us. The spreadsheet also has a couple of tabs for the ASpace mappings, and you can get these mappings off of the ASpace website. And one of the tabs includes my edits to the mappings. And these tabs were mainly for me as a developer, so I could keep track of the changes that we were making to the code in the NYU plugin. Next slide, please. Some other tools that we used are Confluence for keeping track of important documents. We held monthly stakeholder meetings and smaller meetings for other tasks. We use When to Meet to schedule meetings. Another plugin that we used is the ASpace Queue plugin, which I'll talk about more later. And then we made use of 3 servers that were already in place in the TriCo. The API application server, which interacts with the ASpace and Alma APIs, an SFTP server, where we can temporarily store files, and a messaging server that collects messages from our applications. We also took advantage of Alma's import profiles and normalization rules when importing MARC's XML records. Next slide, please. So this is the basic idea of what we wanted to do. We wanted MARC XML records to be exported from ArchivesSpace and to be ingested into Alma. Then we wanted those records to show up in our catalog. When a user clicks on a bib record, we wanted them to see a high quality bib record with appropriate holdings and items information, and for them to be able to click a link that would take them to the full finding aid in ArchivesSpace. And if possible, we wanted the records from ArchivesSpace to be automatically synced to Alma once a week. Next slide, please. So this is a more complicated diagram of what we ended up doing, and I don't have time to go through it with you here. Happy to talk to anyone about it offline at any time. I do want to highlight 2 things in the diagram. The purple boxes represent the plugins that we used. So on the right is the modified NYU Mark XML export plugin. And then up on the left is the ASpace Q plugin. Now, the ASpace Q plugin works with the indexer. So when an ASpace resource record is updated or deleted, it triggers the indexer. And the ASpace Q plugin is connected to the indexer. It sees that record's been updated, and it sends a message to our message server. And then we're able to use those messages to process the changes that were made to the resource record and to update Alma. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges and benefits of working in a consortium. Well, challenges, I would say, are reaching consensus across institutions with many different stakeholders. It takes a lot of time and persistence. Working as a group on MARC records is difficult. We had to educate ourselves a lot about MARC records, and people had strong feelings about what's important to them in a bib record. Choosing a technical path in the face of uncertainty is difficult as a group. And then changing staff, is a challenge. We had several people move on to other positions. I went on parental leave for a while, and as Celia mentioned, Emily passed away, and that was an immense loss in many ways. But we were able to pivot and do the best that we could during all of that. Some of the benefits of working in a consortium are sharing expertise and staff across the TriCo, learning together, increased efficiency by sharing servers and applications, creating shared standards, doing bulk cleanups across repositories. And then we also listed changing staff as a benefit as well. We had some new folks come on with new energy, new perspective, and they really sustained us as we continue to work on this project. Next slide, please. So that's what we have for you. We would be delighted to answer any questions at the end of the webinar, or please feel free to reach out to us via email. And thank you so much.
We go. Hi, everyone. As mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, my name is Eric Fritzler. Hopefully everyone can see my slides.
We can. You're good to go.
Oh, excellent. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's always weird sort of talking into like an empty room where you can't see the faces or anything else. But yeah, so there we are. But yeah, I'm happy to speak on behalf of the Center for Jewish History today, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about the ways in which the Center for Jewish History and our partner institutions use ArchivesSpace at the center, among some of the different tools that we have here for helping everyone discover the collections we've got here and at the center, and discovering and utilizing the material in our reading room. So in a lot of respects, the Center for Jewish History, it's a collaborative home for our 5 partner institutions, which are American Jewish Historical Society, American Sephardi Federation, Leo Baeck Institute, Yeshiva University Museum, and YIVO Institute for Jewish Research. We at the center act in a lot of ways as the umbrella organization, and we provide a variety of different services to our partners, including providing the infrastructure for a shared reading room, in addition to a variety of library systems that we employ here. Currently, in this sort of shared environment that we're in. We use Aleph as our integrated library system, Rosetta as our digital asset management system, and ArchivesSpace as our archival sort of management system. All of those different systems in one way or another end up feeding into our discovery layer, our sort of single search catalog called Primo. All of our systems here are shared, meaning that in a variety of different ways, all of our data is intermingled. We'll have a variety of different maybe sub-libraries, different collections in the systems, but in a lot of ways, like especially in relation to ArchivesSpace, it's one instance then where we have 6 different repositories within it. But it's the same overall environment, and a lot of the different decisions we have here are sort of governed by the idea that it's sort of a shared sandbox, a sort of shared playground, a shared environment for everyone, so that a lot of the decisions that are made end up needing to work both for each individual institution here, but also for the collective, everyone sort of here. Our different partner institutions, they have a variety, they each have a different collecting scope, of course, but they also have different sort of a focus in one way or another and different strengths. And so in terms of us working with our partners, with our different shared systems, there'll be a variety of different sort of, there'll be different ways in which we assist or support them. And in some cases, it will be as simple as providing documentation or sort of recording decisions on a wiki, and that sort of thing. And then in other cases, it might even be doing work in a particular system on their behalf. So a variety of different ways in which we'll end up supporting them. But over the last few years, we've made more and more of a concerted effort to get to a hosted environment, or some sort of a cloud-based system, to get things sort of off-site here at the center, and also just to sort of leave some of the server maintenance duties and upgrades and different things like that to a vendor instead. With that sort of background in mind, in 2019 to 2020, we with the I can't say it enough, but yeah, with the generous and gracious aid of Lyrasis as both a host for us, but also just really working very closely with us on the migration, we took all of our encoded finding aids and migrated them from our old digital asset management system, which was deprecated, to ArchivesSpace. In that time, we've seen sort of immense growth, and sort of once we sort of landed on ArchivesSpace as the shared platform for all of us to utilize, it really provided everyone with the ability to sort of consolidate effort into maybe no longer creating a PDF version of a finding aid and putting that up in line, or maybe no longer having maybe just a paper copy of a finding aid within our reading room, but being able to find a variety of different ways to leverage ArchivesSpace as a platform, so that we're about 2,000 resources, 2,000 collections within our shared repository richer than we'd been when we initially migrated. Likewise, we've seen a variety of, now that we're in ArchivesSpace, we've seen a variety of more usage. In a lot of ways, it seems like we're about 50,000 sessions more in terms of users, looking at Google Analytics each year and putting all that data together. So having ArchivesSpace as a platform has benefited us in terms of that consolidation, knowing where all that data goes, where that trajectory should really end up being, and sort of working towards that. It's probably worth not glazing over some of the different aspects of the migration itself and some of the different ways in which the center, together with our different partner institutions, sort of worked through some of the painfulness of the initial migration. In a lot of ways, the migration, as everyone will sort of notice, coincided with the pandemic. So to some degree, we were able to, we did very little cleanup before migration, and we were able to save, for better or worse, a lot of the cleanup, the remediation, the working through a variety of different things for during the pandemic. So in a lot of ways, then we ended up sort of training together, working together on local documentation, and sort of consolidating, working through the different sort of agents and subjects, the different drop-down menus and whatever else, taking all the different forms and consolidating them into one sort of authorized form for drop-down menus, and then continuing to work through our different subjects and agents and whatever else that might need to be used by the whole community. One of the other sort of benefits, or one of the other upshots of the migration and the approach we had taken, was that we're utilizing a ticketing system, so that when our partners, or we, if we're working on behalf of one of our partners, need to add additional agents or subjects or some other feature to the system, we'll end up using a centralized ticketing system so that we can both track that request, but that we can also sort of work through that, and we've sort of worked through, track it, and also sort of turn around whatever sort of request was in a day or so. We've had a lot of luck with that. But that will also be helpful to treating that same sort of centralized system for both troubleshooting. We're seeing something unusual in the system, in addition to other sorts of requests where someone will talk through subjects, agents, or some new feature, some new training that they might hope for in relation to that with our partners. Now that in a lot of ways we've gotten through some of the initial growing pains with the migration and are continuing to grow, it's sort of worth focusing on some of the present projects that we're working on, and then some of the different projects that we're sort of hoping that we'll have a chance to really kind of get through. One of the things that, and it was very helpful seeing the earlier presentation to hear about the NYU MarkXML plugin, but one of the things that we're currently working on right now is authority control for our integrated library system. But one of the things we'd like to do is try to coordinate more with the different agents and subjects we're seeing in ArchivesSpace, and maybe even start to use some authority control processing from provided by a vendor to sort of check against the two, make sure that everything aligns, and make sure that that the forms and the presentation of different subjects and agents are identical between the two systems, which will be helpful then for our discovery layer and getting that data back into the system. One of the other projects we're currently working on with one of our partner institutions is there's been cleanup within the system, but now that most of that cleanup is done, or that we've reached sort of an equilibrium with that, that we can focus on getting sort of harder models or more difficult sorts of things that were maybe never coded in the first place into ArchivesSpace. And so, like, for some very large institutional collections, some of our partners utilized Excel for the archival description, for the container lists, and we'll help work with converting those Excel lists into resources. And then also, migrations are fun, and we're also going through a fairly large digital asset management system migration. And now that will soon be complete, now that we'll soon be in the cloud for that, we're looking forward to a really big influx of digital object links being added to ArchivesSpace for a variety of different collections that are held here at the center. For the future, and sort of looking through some of the different sort of like wish list stuff that either has been brought to my attention by one of our partner institutions, or just looking at and auditing our own what we might need is previously we'd had an ArchivesSpace administrator working at the center. It was partially grant funded, but they moved on, and we soon, hopefully, to find another ArchivesSpace administrator that could end up helping with discrete projects within the system, and also can help work coordinating consensus with our different partners on a solution one way or another. Since so much of what we've done in the system has been centralized through help desk requests and whatever else, we're also looking for different ways to decentralize some of those requests, or adjusting permissions with some of our different partners so that they can tackle some of that stuff and won't need a help desk request. One of the other things we're hoping to do soon is integrating our circulation system more with ArchivesSpace and setting that up. In some cases, we were concerned that we might need some sort of a custom add-on or some sort of custom configurations for that. And I don't want to end up talking too long in one way or another, but one of the other projects that we're hoping to tackle or hoping to find a way to figure out soon more is a good solid workflow for digital object link evaluation and remediation is necessary. Since so many of our collections were migrated, it seems really important for us to be able to evaluate all the links that were in those migrated sources or resources, and ensure that all those links still work. Data is migrated, IDs change, all sorts of different things like that. So trying to find an automated way of working through that. I've encountered situations where we've had to do it in a much more manual way, and it's a lot less fun. So we'd look for some other way of trying to evaluate that stuff. But that's a lot of how we use the system here at the Center for Jewish History with our partners. And I'm happy to talk at the end, answer any other questions that I can along the way, but I will stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, Eric, for that. And hopefully that works. So hello, everybody from the Land of Enchantment. I'm Portia with the Center for Southwest Research at the University of New Mexico. And I'm going to tell you about how the state of New Mexico uses ArchivesSpace. So to give you a little bit of background, UNM, where I am, switched in 2021 and started using ArchivesSpace. We previously used a system known as the Rocky Mountain Online Archive. That system was built on software provided by ZiaSoft, and they informed us in 2018 that they would no longer support that software, that particular software, and that we would need to start looking for a new system. It took us actually a few years before we were able to move over to ArchivesSpace, but we got there eventually. And when we told people that we were leaving RMOA, I have to admit that there were mixed reactions. On the positive side, some people were happy that we could do more than just enter finding aids into a system, and they could use it for their accessions and for their tools. They were happy that the changes were immediate. In RMOA, we would need to download the finding aid, make our changes manually, then re-upload the finding aid to see what it looked like. If we messed up, you kind of rinse and repeat that process until you get what you want. RMOA was also manual coding as opposed to the easy form entry that ArchivesSpace has. And it was not Google searchable. So now being Google searchable, I would also say I've heard from several other repositories, our reference numbers have gone up quite a bit because of the discoverability of this software. However, change is difficult. People weren't necessarily willing to accept that we needed to change, especially since the decision was made from top down. There was supposed to be a committee. I was on that committee. And we were going to look at different software options. And then one day I ran into another committee member in the hall and she's like, oh, by the way, we chose ArchivesSpace. And even I was on the committee and I don't know what was going on. So clearly there was a lack of communication. Some people were also upset that, you know, even though it was not supported, RMOA was not broken. It was working fine the way it had been for the past, 15, 20 years. And it was also a very forgiving system. Your coding did not have to be perfect in order to display properly in the system. And I call it lazy coding. So an example of that is with your box number, you could put the box number in one time and you wouldn't have to repeat it until you switched boxes and the system would display properly. That was a nightmare when we moved over to ArchivesSpace because it messed up the top containers quite a bit. But I'm not going to get into that part of the data cleanup for this presentation. Christine mentioned the different ways we use the repository method, and you can see some of the repositories. We finally got ourselves together, and in May 2021, with help from our IT department, we moved about 3,200 finding aids from 18 institutions across the state. IT had a 93% success rate, so about 220 finding aids were not able to transfer into the system with IT's help. And then we started with over 16,000 subjects and over 11,000 agents that were shared across all institutions. There were a lot of duplicates and there was a lot of cleanup that has been done and that still does need to be done. Here's a complete list of all of the institutions that we brought with us. I was going to try and do a fancy little map, but we're mostly Albuquerque and Santa Fe based institutions with a few in Taos, Las Vegas, Las Cruces, and Socorro too. Okay, so the question is why? Why did we bring everybody over to ArchivesSpace with us? And the first reason is really, it was a carryover from the previous finding aid systems. And I say systems because before the Rocky Mountain Online Archive, there was the Online Archive of New Mexico. And this goes back over 25 years. I remember my first job out of library school was at New Mexico State University in the Rio Grande Historical Collections. And I remember encoding finding aids to put online in the Online Archive of New Mexico. So this has been the way New Mexico has shared finding aid systems for over 25 years now. We do this with other software systems as well. So UNM hosts New Mexico Digital Collections, which is essentially content DM, and allows repositories from around the state to create, will recreate their instance, and then they are allowed to put in whatever digitized materials they want to put into that system. Also, with the repositories, we all have different needs. I mean, when UNM transferred, we had over almost 1,700 finding aids in the system, but not all of the repositories need that much space. You can see the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center only has 4 finding aids online. And I did a quick look and I saw that 11 of the repositories that we have in New Mexico have less than 10 finding aids online. So it doesn't make sense if you only have 1 or 2 finding aids to have your own ArchivesSpace instance. At least we didn't think so. And then finally, there's a lot of overlapping topics in New Mexico history, and there's a lot of overlapping collections. So I did a just quick search for Billy the Kid, and you can see that if you were doing research on Billy the Kid, there's at least 3 repositories in the state that has Billy the Kid information. But at least you would know that in one place rather than having to go to multiple places to find that information. So that's a brief look at why. I will say that since 2011, we have continued to add repositories. We've added at least 4 more. And I know that there are other repositories that are considering joining, but are maybe not yet in a place where they have the ability to do so. Okay, so the big question, how do we maintain ArchivesSpace with so many different institutions? And this, I would say, New Mexico is a good model for what not to do. As Jessica mentioned in the beginning, I ended up as an accidental project manager. I expressed interest in helping with this process and suddenly tag Portia, you're it. And I became the main point of contact for all institutions and for all archivists. So if anyone wants to set up a new account, if a new institution wants to join, they contact me. I am a single point of failure. If I get busy, if something happens, then it stops the workflow for everybody. So that's not really a sustainable model. I do work and conduct, group-wide and statewide training as necessary. I will also say that we have a great group, a state archival group, and they have been fantastic in providing opportunities for me to do training for everybody, whether or not their repository is in our ArchivesSpace instance. And they've also been able to share that training on our website so that people who maybe couldn't join live are able to access the training that is done. I am the main point of contact for problems as they arise. So those 220 finding aids that did not import, I was the one who worked with the repositories. I told them if they could identify them, I would try to help see if I could import them. One of the other common issues that arises is not being able to generate a PDF file from the finding aid. And for that one, I always tell them to check your ampersands because you have to have a space on either side of the ampersand. Otherwise, for some reason, we can't generate PDFs. And I've not been the only person doing data cleanup with the agents and subjects, but I have been one of the main people doing data cleanup with the agents and subjects. And I've told people I'm not policing data. What is data is there. I don't really care. When we have multiple versions of the same name or the same subject, I will merge those into one. So that's been a lot. I wanted to show you, I am not a fan. It's just not my happy place making documentation. It's very necessary, but it doesn't, it's not what makes me happy. Let's just put it that way. And but this is some documentation that I created for the importing of finding aids that I had a list of multiple things that I would check each time, and 95% of those finding aids that did not import, once I went through my list, were able to be imported. So I was very happy with that. And I talk like I'm doing this alone, but I am not. Our IT department here at UNM has been a godsend, helping me troubleshoot things that I cannot fix. I send to them and they are usually able to fix. They have also worked directly with repositories to import finding aids that may have come from systems outside of the Rocky Mountain Online Archive. And whenever something just doesn't seem right, they are a good general contact and are able to fix whatever is going on with the system. So this would be my recommendation for other groups. If you are working on having some sort of shared repository, the workload of being the contact actually needs to be built into a position, not added onto a pre-existing position. It's a lot of work and there's a lot of things that could go wrong. And I would actually recommend distributing the workload so that, again, you don't have that single point of failure that I have become. And I try very hard not to be, but sometimes I do drop the ball because I'm just human. I would also say, you can try to work on getting people invested as soon as possible and involve them in the decision-making or the testing. We had a test interface, and for some reason, it just never occurred to us to share that with the other repositories. I don't know why it never occurred to us, probably because we were just trying to figure out ourselves what was going on, but there's no reason that we couldn't have involved them at the testing stage. And then, one of the other issues that we had here was I was so busy trying to fix like the finding aids that didn't go in, cleaning up the data. And then people were coming to me and saying, all right, Portia, but how do we use this? If a researcher comes in, how do we help the researcher? And I would be like, I don't know. I'm still just trying to get you data to work with. You have to give me some time to figure that out. So, break up that responsibility if you need to, between the public user interface and the staff interface, just again, to diversify and spread out, distribute that workload. And finally, again, communication. I cannot stress this enough. We did so poorly with communication looking back on it. We are much, much better about that now. And speaking of that, I would say now the other repositories have really embraced ArchivesSpace even more fully than UNM has. They're using more of the modules. They're doing more with their instances than we are. And some of them have just really just taken it and, started running with what they can do. We have been loving the searchability, the findability of the finding aids and the analytics. We've added Google Analytics to our site as well. I would say, prior to ArchivesSpace, we would probably have, 3-4 requests internationally per year. I've been doing them email now, and I feel like we get international requests every other week. It really has helped us find it. We are doing just very basic work with ArchivesSpace. We don't have any plugins. We're just doing the bare minimum of things that we can do. We are looking at expanding our use and functionality, but we take everything slow. However, I will say what has been great, Christine mentioned in the beginning about community, and I think using ArchivesSpace, having our statewide group has really brought us together as a community, around ArchivesSpace. And we are now considering using that model for other potential needs that we have, like digital preservation. And we learn a lot from each other. I say that I do the trainings, but other people jump in and say, well, you showed us this way, but really when I do it, this is the model that I use. And that's great because there's the way the system is built. There's so many different ways of doing things that we're learning from each other what we can do. And I think it really, for us, the two takeaways from the model that we have comes down to these two main reasons. which is one is for the researchers. It's been, so helpful. I've heard from so many other repositories, again, about how the reference requests have increased. We have overlapping collections, we have overlapping topics, we are findable, and it helps the researchers. And just doing this together is something that we could never have done individually. So that's it for me. I want to thank you so much. And again, I am also happy to answer any questions that you might have. And I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, Portia. And thank you to the rest of our presenters. That was really great and really very interesting. As someone who helped sort of manage a task force that implemented ArchivesSpace with multiple repositories within a single organization, I can only imagine the work that goes into orchestrating what you do. So that was really fascinating. And then Portia, I was worried we were going to be ending on a downer, and you brought it back to a really hopeful note. So thank you so much for that. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and move into our Q&A. If you have a question for any of the presenters, please drop that into the Q&A box or the Q&A section of Zoom, and I will read the questions as they come in. Right now, we do have one question, and I'll get to that. But yeah, if you have anything comes to mind for any of the presenters, please do drop them into the Q&A. So for our first question, Heather asks, thanks for these great presentations. It seems like there are two ways of making ArchivesSpace finding aids discoverable through Alma Primo. One is to create bib records linking to ArchivesSpace finding aids in Alma, and the other is making ArchivesSpace searchable through Primo. Have I got that right? And what do folks see as pros or cons in these different approaches?
That sounds right to me. We wanted to have the container information in our bib records, and one thing we didn't talk about in our presentation is that we wanted for things that are off-site to be requestable by staff in Alma, and that works with an integration with Kaiasoft in Alma. So I'm not sure if we could do that if we were just making it discoverable through Primo.
Yeah, that does sound right to me too. We use OAI, the OAI feed from ArchivesSpace to get records into Primo to make them discoverable. I mean, we are hoping eventually to tie Aeon in so that boxes folders would be requestable that way. But it is correct. I think that none of it would be requestable from the workflow that we're currently using. Another probable downside, maybe with our approach too, is it's sort of an all or nothing kind of thing. I believe with Alma, there's going to be more of a possibility of tailoring which records are getting to your discovery layer. Whereas with ArchivesSpace, it's sort of on the repository level or on a particular level rather than the ability to like tailor it in any way.
Thank you both. And Heather, if you have any follow-up, I'm happy to read it. Cindy asks, thank you for your presentations. How are all of your shared instances funded or financially supported?
This is Celia. I can answer for the TriCollege Consortium. So we are 3 different schools, and each of us has our own ArchivesSpace membership that we pay for separately. And then we all contribute to a big TriCo budget. So the 3 library directors get together every year with VPs from our respective colleges and agree on a budget that covers a whole bunch of things. And one of them is paying for 2 developers. So that pays for Laurin, who is our developer support, and one of her predecessors installed ArchivesSpace, and Laurin continues to manage it.
I can talk for New Mexico. So actually, ArchivesSpace, the funds that we were paying to support ZiaSoft was actually, it's less to support ArchivesSpace. We do allow repositories, if they would like to make a donation to being part of it, that goes to IT for supporting. They can do that. It is not required, though, as long as you are willing to kind of maintain your own repository. We will let you use it free of charge. Either way, the cost to UNM is actually less than the cost for the previous system.
Cool. And I can respond in terms of, or on behalf of the Center for Jewish History. It's theoretically paid for by it's theoretically paid for through fundraising that the center does, in addition to all of our partners sort of pay into the dream and experiment of the center. And so I imagine it's sort of covered in both ways.
Thanks, everyone. Kelly asks, for institutions with one instance of ArchivesSpace and multiple repositories, how do you approach the creation and management of container profiles, subjects, agents, shared records? Is one person responsible, or are there managers of each repository that do that? If multiple people can create these, is there a regular review for duplicates? It's a great question.
I can answer for New Mexico, and we are the Wild West. So we do not have rules about who creates the container profiles, subjects, agents. For the most part, people have been very cautious about doing things. And I would say, as far as reviewing for duplicates or cleaning things up, that has mostly fell on me to do. So, you know, I've told people you can create whatever you need, but we try and have a rule, especially with the subjects and agents. You cannot delete anything that is there if you don't think it's being used. That's not up for you to decide. Create what you want, delete nothing. That's kind of how we've done things.
TriCo is also pretty chaotic. Lots of people can enter data and it does get messy, and we've done kind of periodic cleanup efforts, as you could tell from our presentation. One thing that I'd say was really important is that we only kind of police published agents and agents really is where it's relevant. We only control published ones. So if people are creating accession records, those are allowed to be messy, and we have like a code word donor that is in all of those messy records, so that we know that it hasn't been checked or controlled.
Hi, on behalf of the center, we have a lot of that centralized. Given that we did a lot of cleanup after migration, a lot of the container profiles and whatever else were able to be like condensed, consolidated. But for new ones, somebody would put in a help desk request, since it's centralized, or would send an email or whatever else. And in a lot of cases, we're not necessarily policing any request for subject agents or any container profiles or whatever else, as much as just sort of discussing what the use case is for container profiles or something new in a drop-down menu. For subjects and agents or whatever else, we've got kind of a wide variety of both authorized forms from VF and Library of Congress, in addition to a whole lot of local headings that we'll just sort of deal with through the ticketing system.
Oh, one thing for the TriCo is that when the automatic syncing process happens between ArchivesSpace and Alma, if there's a problem with one of the top containers, then there's an error message. So it checks for certain things, like for us, each top container needs to have a location, and it also needs to have a type. So if it doesn't have those things, then there'll be an error message, and then we'll let the archivist know that they need to update those top containers.
Thank you all. A little bit more about Kelly's question that I'm curious about. So I know that he said that you don't necessarily police what gets put in, but do you have any restrictions around permissions for individual users within the different repositories? Maybe only like people with certain levels of access can create these shared records? I'm curious.
At TriCo, yeah, so we have different, so each school has one person who's at the admin level who can create new user accounts. And then they allocate a level of access needed, and depending on different user roles. So if they're creating a user account for a student worker, they might not give them full access.
Right.
But I think that all of our user profiles do have the ability to create agents and subjects. I'd have to check that.
Yeah, for New Mexico, I agree. First of all, I think all of the profiles do have the ability to create and delete agents and subjects, which is why we always test people not to delete them. But yeah, so usually when people are just starting out, I do give them reduced permissions, and I tell them that I give them reduced permissions as they gain more experience with the system. I have upgraded them, and we have created more administrators around the state so that some people are able to create their own new users that doesn't involve me. So that's starting to get a little bit more distributed.
Thank you both. That's really interesting and sounds very complicated. Bree asked, Eric, can you talk more about the subject and agent creation ticketing system? How many tickets are you reviewing per day to keep up with creation?
Maybe usually 1 or 2 requests a day. There's not really a limit. If someone has worked on a very large collection, they need a lot. In a lot of cases, when the requests come in, a lot of times people will put like a Library of Congress control number to ensure that we import the right one using the ArchivesSpace plugin, or that sort of thing. But in a lot of cases, it's not too bad, and it's not usually too onerous one way or another. And then sort of another aspect of this too, it's probably worth discussing, is that usually I think about twice a year we'll go through and look for duplicates, merge like the same sort of ones, or whatever else. If there are any duplicates that sort of crop up from whether or not I'm entering the agent or someone else might be.
Thanks, Eric. Jane asks, do people ever show up at UNM looking for materials housed elsewhere because they didn't realize that the finding aid database contained materials from multiple places? That's a good question.
Hi, Jane. So yes, that does happen sometimes. But again, we've had shared finding aids for 25 years. So most of the users are used to seeing multiple collections in their results, or multiple repositories, I should say, in their results. It does happen occasionally. And we do tell them like, oh, this is at New Mexico State, not here. And usually they tell us that they were planning to visit there anyway. So it's not a common occurrence. It happens occasionally. And again, we have so many shared topics and collections that in most cases, the researchers were planning to already go to that other repository.
Thanks. That's really interesting. All right, it looks like we're all caught up on the Q&A, but if anyone has any questions or follow-up questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We have a few more minutes. Not seeing any, so I'll speak very slowly. But I want to go ahead and thank all of our presenters today for a great webinar. It was really interesting to see the different approaches that organizations are taking to sharing and implementation. Definitely some lessons learned that we can all take advantage of, but also just really cool to see how this can like amplify collections across multiple organizations. It was really neat. And as a person that likes seeing project management and people's the skeletons in people's closets, I thought it was really interesting. So thank you to all of our presenters for being willing to share that today. And since I'm not seeing any other questions in the Q&A, I'll thank all of our attendees as well for joining us for this learning opportunity. And I look forward to seeing all of you at the next ArchivesSpace event. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.